How's it going, everybody? And today we're gonna talk about a video. I want to do original reaction, but because my laptop is very old, it doesn't handle quality well anymore. So it's mostly a quick response of a YouTube channel called Kyle, who is a Christian who promotes and defends Eastern Orthodox Christianity. And he did a video why atheists lie to themselves. He stated at the beginning that he used to be an atheist and then became an Eastern Orthodox Christian. However, the video's preview about the iceberg video he did about traditional Catholicism leads to orthodoxy, and he say many things that are just straight up false. And I'm afraid he did one statement that kind of bothers me, that he made. Maybe I'm misinterpreting it, but he doesn't believe in evolution apparently, but I don't know that's actually the case. So it's kind of vague. And before I go into go a little bit what he said and trying to respond at least best of my language capabilities, because I have a speaking problem and English is not my native language. But the point is, we have to understand, fundamentally speaking. Before I say this, I gotta put links in the description of academic and peer review literature on atheism and stuff like that. But the point is, atheism, theism, and agnosticism. They're all about the question: does God exist? Atheism is the position of God does not exist. That's it. Theism, atheism, and agnosticism has nothing to do with morals, ethics, politics, metaphysics, ontology, the philosophy of the mind, etc. Right? It has nothing to do with any of these things. They are separate to the question of God's existence. A theist, atheist, and agnostic can agree on each other on every single topic, with the obvious exception whether or not God exists. He stated before that he's a Gen Z, which is the second youngest generation, youngest being Alpha. I'm also Gen Z. I also have a similar background, well, not completely, a Gen Z college educated background, right? Although he says he's from a non-religious family and he never had a religious experience, but became religious later. I'm kind of the opposite approach, where I was raised, my family wasn't that religious, but they were Christians, right? But they were very very religious, but But the point is, I became an atheist later on. Well, was it straight from Christianity straight to atheism? It is more of a progress I have, where I started with Roman Catholicism, because that's the one I grew up with, and then just plain on Christianity, you know, and then over time questioning the traditional Christian belief is still thinking that God is real to at least to some extent, but just maybe if I learn a little bit of theology and philosophy of religion, maybe understand other religion, maybe I get a better picture. I dabble a little bit of Zen Buddhism, if the I never declared myself as a Zen Buddhist, but I did practice it for a short while, and then over time I became agnostic, and if the I'm heavily summarizing, but over a little bit, little by little, eventually I became an atheist. The first problem he starts to mention that atheism is a worldview. This is a problem. Philosophically speaking, atheism, theism, and agnosticism are not worldviews. Now, from a sociological point of view, many theists, atheists, and agnostics tend to have a certain worldview, but the position in and of itself is not a worldview. And he said the logical limit to atheism is if it leads to existential nihilism. This is completely false. Like I said, atheism just simply means the belief and non-existence of God. That's it. It doesn't automatically mean it leads to this. There are atheists who are existential nihilists, but there are also atheists who are the very positive idealists, right? There are atheists, for example, there are atheists who are Platonists. Yes, there are atheists who are Platonists, who believe in Plato's metaphysics, which many Christians will agree, because Christian theology is fundamentally inherent to Platonism, specifically Middle Platonism and Neoplatonism. There are atheists who are Platonists, like for example Eric Hobsbawm is one example, and there's also atheists who are Pythagoreans, like Max Turkman. There are atheists who are idealists, like J.E.T. McCart or the Schusterberg. there are atheists and agnostics who believe in substance dualism, or non-dualism or panpsychism. This is a straw man argument. To say all atheism leads to existential nihilism or atheism worldview, it's the same thing saying theism leads to supernatural, not superstition, or theism is a will. That's not true. You're not understanding the philosophical category. This is a category error. And also we can know about the whole tradition of Christian existentialism. There's an entire tradition that goes all the way back from the 1700s, if I'm not mistaken, probably older. And even then, when he said like atheism leads to this, and you can use the same argument, atheism leads to that, you basically think of sociological grounds, where like, on sociologically speaking, they think of this. But he used an example of Pew Research Center, but this is exclusively of the U.S. Because, like I said, outside the US, this is very different. For example, Japan is the most atheistic country in the world when it comes to the popular percentage who label themselves as atheists. Yet, despite considering themselves as atheists, many of them still believe in the afterlife, still believe in meaning, still believe all this and that. In contrast with the US, where atheists, in his understanding, is existential nihilism, which again, this is not the case because atheism, theism, and Gnosticism are not the same as positivism, nihilism, or any other metaphysical position because they are different things. This is a category error. And he uses this example where he grew up being an atheist, or at least like what he considered atheist, which is mostly liberal politics, which is, again, liberalism and conservatism doesn't mean to anything. You could be an atheist who is a conservative, and you could be a liberal who is a very religious. It doesn't mean anything. And he uses examples like Bill Maher and Family Guy. I'm like, I just like when I keep watching the videos, like, did he bother like to study philosophical theology and philosophy of religion? Because a comedian and a theologian slash philosopher, are two different things. They have a different understanding what is considered religion, what is considered God, etc. So like, okay. And again, like, you could point to every example, and he's like, his life is meaningless when it's like consumer product. This is more of a problem of capitalism with atheism. You are being alienated. This is alienation. This is literally what Karl Marx was talking about. You're describing what Karl Marx is talking about. Yet instead of pointing to the problem of the socio-economic system, you're thinking atheism instead, which is very abstract, just like theism, and you're not looking at the more concrete example, which is capitalism. And his complaints saying it's like from new atheist movements, which is, actually, if you analyze, and even scholarship will point out, this is just a right-wing libertarian Western chauvinist movement. It just so happened to be atheist because of the 9/11 attacks. If that event never happened, the new atheists, the people who are associated with the new atheists, will still happen. Just remove the atheism part, but keep the politics they have in. It's the same thing. Sam Harris is still pro-Zionist. Christopher Hitchens supported the reactionary politics. Richard Dawkins is transphobic. It's a Western chauvinist movement that just so happened to be atheist because of the 9/11 attacks. Nothing more, nothing less. And he said the old atheists were more honest because life is meaningless. Again, you are ignoring multiple examples, historically speaking, that doesn't make sense because you are focusing exclusively on existential philosophers like Friedrich Nietzsche, Walter Hartecker, and Chipo Sartre. But, like I said, look at other philosophers like Arthur Schwarzenberg, who is a non-dualist idealist, who believe in the afterlife and the indestructibility of the will, who criticize Epicurus' thesis on nothingness after death. You have multiple philosophers, atheists, who are Aristotelians, Platonists, panpsychists, even dualists. This is oversimplification of the history of the intellectual tradition of atheism, just like atheists will misunderstand the intellectual tradition of theism. It's like, oh, all theists are superstitious, ignoring the fact that it's more complicated than that. And his problem is with the new atheists, like, they're very liberal. It's like saying it's the same thing saying conservatives are very theists are very conservative, or agnostics are very centered. No, you could be a theist, agnostic, or atheist and be a liberal, conservative, fascist, communist. It doesn't matter. And it's like his problem is like they can marry who they want to please, or the women have a choice. It's like, what are these rights? Where do they come from? the answer, like if you ever bother studying the topic of political science or political philosophy, there are social constructs. Society itself is just a foundation of multiple social constructs, and we use these social contracts to affect our material conditions to understand how to affect our lives. And when I was watching this video, I had no idea he's saying this as like it's a bad thing or a good thing. But if he's saying this as a bad thing, then you are ignoring thousands of years of history where before the Middle Ages and before a certain time period like the Renaissance where homosexual relationships were condemned, for the longest point in human history, it was okay. It was certain groups with reactionary mentality who introduced this idea way after the fact it was already normalized. And he also is against abortion because he believes the life begins at conception, even though many doctors, at least at the moment, agreed like you can do abortion as late as 6 months. Although in some cases they do that because of the baby already has serious condition where it will not survive shortly after birth. And again, he goes back with the abortion, like where he complains atheists about morality, justice, and then where do these come from? Are they made up like God? It's like, but he failed to understand the concept of social construction. Race, sex, and gender are social constructs, something that we created to understand and affect our material conditions. He said, atheists have their morality based on their feelings. You can argue the same thing for theists, but remember there are other theories of morality and ethics which is based on scientific understanding. For example, in ethical naturalism, which is a ethical position and moral ontology, which is based on scientific understanding of cognitive psychology, evolutionary psychology, neuroscience, anthropology, etc., that understands about morality. We know where do morality come from a scientific point of view. I will put link in the description about that type of literature. But the point is, he's trying to make a straw man that atheism equals existential nihilism or logical conclusion leads to existential nihilism, ignoring the fact that it doesn't, because atheism is simply the belief in non-existent God. The same thing with theism is simply the belief with the existence of God. That's it. It has nothing to do with existential nihilism because that is a completely metaphysical position about the human condition. You could be a theist and an existential nihilist, and you could be an atheist and a positive superstition believer. You can do that. There is no contradiction. He's doing a category mistakes. And he keeps another example. He keeps going back with the morality. Where's your morality? It's like it's based on feelings. No, you can argue of a very emotional approach to moral ethics, like David Hume did. Emotionism. But you can also use the moral ethical system based on a purely philosophical perspective, a very deductive logical consistency. All sides, DS, AD, now they do that. Like he has a very poor understanding of what atheism, deism, and Gnosticism is, even though he himself used to call himself an atheist, and now he's a Christian Orthodox. I don't know if this is what happens when you subscribe to religious apologetics. Your previous understanding gets worse, or you just never honestly sat down, read a peer-reviewed academic scholarship on these types of topics. He also again points out they never question the why, especially like morality. Why bother, right? Science doesn't use science, right? Science can't answer the why question. It depends what is the question. For example, why is there something rather than nothing? That's actually a debate among cosmologists. And also like his main problem in front of the video is not much to do with atheism, but it's more to do with existential nihilism proper and and capitalism, because he by his own acknowledged it, people who live good, happy, successful lives are in the minority of the overall population, which again, and he also acknowledged only rich countries, the upper class. For example, if the 20% of the global population are upper class, or more commonly known as rich people. In the United States, the 25% of the population are upper class, and because they have all these extra wealth, power, influence, and privileges, they have better access on many of the conditions they need for survival and happiness, while the rest of the population don't. This is a problem of social economic issues. He also has a problem that he also mentioned about, that as a deist, as a Christian, like I'm going to have kids knowing full well 100% that they're going to suffer. While atheists, they don't need to practice, they can just end suffering now with assisted suicide, just don't have kids. Somehow atheists are the only one that have that, like that has some form of monopoly of that choice. Deists do it as well, and Gnosticism do it as well, theological non-conformism as well, and many other positions. This is implied to everybody regardless of the God position. And again, he points out like why bother about this is more his critique of naive utilitarianism, like maximizing pleasure at the minimize pain. Although that is a thesis, but that's more like a simplification of it. And he also point out like what's stopping Jeff Bezos of maximizing his pleasure at the expense of everybody else. This is another problem with capitalism as well. And he points out like dogmatic beliefs of atheism, which is LGBT rights, which kind of concerning if he's against that. Abortion, again, kind of concerning he's against it, especially women who are victims of rape or incest and they have a baby because of it. And I'm just hoping in those situations he justified abortion, but he does not. That's problematic. And also like liberalism, which again that has nothing to do with atheism. You could be a deist and not still atheist and be a liberal, and also be a conservative of Nazi or communist, etc. So that doesn't mean anything. And he's also throughout the video he'll just straight up become transphobic because for him he used Aaron Raw, which I heard of him, but I haven't watched his videos like since 2010 the 2017, so it's been a long while. But he used an example of like atheists are inconsistent. He used a clip from Error Raw that he talks about what is a delusion, and when he talks about an example of delusion is trans people, which is transphobic because trans people always exist. We have archaeological evidence of people who were considered trans or non-binary as far back as the Stone Age, and we have many indigenous groups throughout the world. They have third genders, fourth gender, hell, even five genders. Hell, there are many religions throughout the world that gods and supernatural beings possess non-binary or trans characteristics. Or Christianity, when Paul and other early Christians believed angels are sexless, asexual, agender. Or in Kabbalah Jewish literature in the medieval ages, God is non-binary. So, he's making a straw man. He also has another strongman. He points to another YouTuber who is an atheist called Cosmic Skeptic, and he's a proponent of veganism. Like I said, this does not apply to all atheists, but like the same thing you could say you are like every argument he said, you could do the same thing to theists and agnostic. Keep saying why till eventually at least one of them is based on feelings or emotions. You can do the same thing with all sides. So he's doing a strong man, and he's like because Cosmic Skeptic is a vegan. He's talk about if you're against animal suffering, why not just stop making more animals? If somehow that was that easy. Like as somehow we have superpowers to change the world in a snap. There are social, economic, political issues that connects one another. Just because you want against it doesn't mean you automatically have the power to do it. Look at climate change. We all agree that climate change is bad and we should do something about it. But the people who have the social, economic, political power, like the people in federal governments, rich people, they are against that. Why? They are against their class interests. They prefer to burn the world in order to save money at the expense of the majority of the population. Just because if you're against climate change, why not just stop all climate activity together? If that's a straw man. He also does the argument like skeptics, or when you talk about atheists, or they only stop at skepticism to religion and nothing else, which is not true. We have philosophical skepticism. Atheists who are philosophical, who are skeptical about the external world. Like for example, Hilary Putnam, who is one of the most influential philosophers of all time in neo-pragmatism. He questioned the reality of the external, whether or not he actually exists, and that's where he came up with the argument of brain in a vat. Another similar argument like the simulation argument. These are extreme forms of skepticism, not just they stop at skepticism to religion, that's that. No, there are many forms of skepticism and many atheists throughout history. For example, and like I mentioned, an extreme example of skepticism, we have one of the most influential philosophers who did extreme form of skepticism, and he's an atheist. And also he said, atheist, why you don't ever question? He pointed to many like political examples, right? And yes, they do. you are focusing exclusively atheists who are politically liberal or conservative, who wants the status quo, who likes the society they live in. There are annoying atheists who question or are extremely skeptical of the things that you are pointing out. If for you, for some reason, atheism and liberalism are inseparable and somehow anybody beyond that don't exist, even though they do. There's like entire fucking genealogical traditions of it. So I like again, all he does is straw man, and when he's criticized, it's not actually atheism but nihilist and naive hedonist. That's what he's arguing against. But for him, atheism is the same thing as naive hedonist and existential nihilist. If it's somehow Christians, Jews, Muslim, Buddhists, Hindu, Persians, and every other religion somehow never adopt those traditions either. Like somehow they never adopt those philosophical points of view either. Even though, like again, there's an entire tradition. Just go to fucking Wikipedia. And when he goes on to like Western atheists, which is talk about the imperial core, like he points out like they never question like the Western values and stuff like I said, ignore entire traditions. Like they think they're neutral. There's a famous saying by Howard Zinn, who is by the way an atheist: "You cannot be neutral on a moving train." And also it goes on to the problem of suffering, which again there's an entire philosophical tradition about the concept of suffering, how to respond. Again, I will academic peer review literature on these specific topics in question. And he talks about the problem of suffering, which he does another straw man. If the atheists haven't defined what is good or bad, ignoring entire philosophical traditions, both deists, atheists, and atheists alike, define what is good and bad when using the proper evil argument, right? And also, it's like if God is good, why He create a world knowing there is suffering? That's also naive because you can also use the argument: if God is who, why He create the world with suffering? He could have easily created a world without suffering because of His omnipotent, omniscience, omnibenevolence, which is a contradiction. And by the way, fun fact: the first person who started the proper evil argument was the Buddha. Yeah, chronologically speaking, even though people talk about Epicurus, yes, but the Buddha, who was born way before Epicurus, actually did a similar argument about the problem of evil. So there's that. And basically, that's the entire video. He just does straw man about atheism equals existential nihilism, which I can do the same. Theism equals superstitious nonsense. That's not true. There's more complicated to get that. He's just started with a straw man. He assumes the conclusion, work his way backwards. That's the fundamental problem with his video, and this is the fundamental problem with apologetics in general. They assume the conclusion of their opposition and trying to work around with the conclusion instead of, okay, let's see where this evidence lies. But the problem is, like, he assumes the conclusion, and like I said, deism, atheism, and nothing just about the God question. Anything outside the God has nothing to do with it because there are different philosophical positions. For example, does the afterlife exist? If you say yes, you're a survivalist. If you say no, you're a mortalist. You can be an atheist and a survivalist, and you can be a theist and a mortalist. That's a thing. Just do your studies on philosophy. So, links in the description. Bye.